Welcome to Thursday at the Museum. I'm Sharon Harrell, Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. In today's tour, we'll focus on the exhibition Van Gogh's Artistic Roots in the DIA's collection. If you like what you see, I hope that you are inspired to visit the museum and see the artworks in person. As a friendly reminder, for the residents of Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties, general admission is always free. During today's presentation, we'd love to hear from you. You can share comments and questions with us by leaving a public comment if you're watching it on Facebook, or if you're joining us on YouTube, make sure you're logged in first, and you can leave a comment there as well. Those comments will be monitored by the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development, Christine Mark. Now, let's meet our presenters, volunteer docents, Cindy Patrick and Ray Henney. Hi, Ray. Hi, Cindy.
Hello. Thanks so much, Sharon. You did a great job for your first time.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll leave it to you guys, the experts.
Thank you so much. That's us, Cindy, the experts. Anyway, I know I am very excited about today's virtual tour, and I'm sure you are too, Cindy.
I am.
It is. It concerns an exhibition that currently is on display at the DIA called Van Gogh's Artistic Roots, the Hague School in French Realism. The exhibition is a precursor to the DIA's blockbuster exhibition, Van Gogh in America, which begins on October 2nd. Next slide, please. The current exhibition, called Van Gogh's Artistic Roots, is located on the second floor of the museum in a gallery adjacent to Rivera Court. It will be on display until this coming January 29th. The exhibition consists of 17 paintings and works on paper. Those on paper are displayed in rotation. The exhibition is designed to significantly broaden visitors' understanding of Vincent van Gogh and enhance their appreciation of Van Gogh's art in preparation for Van Gogh in America. And here's how. Next slide, please. Van Gogh's paintings are widely appreciated for their intense and luscious colors and brushstrokes. Here are two examples of Van Gogh's paintings that are in the DIA's collection, two of my favorites. But Van Gogh meant much more in his art, and he wanted to communicate much more than simply the beauty of color and paint. This is what the current exhibition is all about. It explores the inspiration of Van Gogh's choices of subject matter and his intended message. Indeed, while Van Gogh is commonly associated with the Impressionists, art scholars and historians categorize him as a post-impressionist. One reason is because of his intended message. For example, next slide, please. Many consider Claude Monet to be the quintessential Impressionist painter. Here's one of Monet's paintings that is in the DIA's collection. With fluid brushstrokes, Monet explores the impact of color and light on how we see in a moment in time. It's a study of the sensation in a moment and emotion of perception, rather than simply a realistic depiction of the subject matter. Post-impressionists, however, tend to communicate more than simply the sensory perception of seeing in the moment. For Van Gogh, his paintings were aimed at communicating the meaning of virtue, morality, spirituality, and God's blessing. Next slide, please. So in 1881, early in his artistic career, and before he developed his style of using brilliant colors, Van Gogh began to study with Anton Mauve, who lived in The Hague, which is a city in the Netherlands. There, Van Gogh was reintroduced to two artistic movements: French Realism, which includes the French Barbizon School, and the Hague School. That's the second. Van Gogh previously appreciated these two arts art movements when he worked for an art dealer. But in The Hague, the works of these two schools shaped the message and the meaning of Van Gogh's art throughout his life. Next slide, please. Here are examples of paintings of these two schools from the exhibition. French Realism is on the left, the Hague School is on the right. Both of these groups have their origins in the Realism movement that took hold in various places in Europe and later in America, beginning in the early to mid-19th century. Next slide, please. The Realist movement grew in opposition to the prevailing grand manner of art taught by the official academies and prized by the art market. This art drew heavily on antiquity and Renaissance art, emphasizing humanistic or moral subjects and ethical themes. Here are examples of paintings in the grand manner style. Notice the noble subject matter and the classic forms. Next slide, please. In fact, this approach was so pervasive that it even influenced portrait painting. Notice the idolized rendition of the subject matter. Next slide, please. Here are two paintings by Gustave Courbet, an early proponent of realism and considered to be one of the founders of the French Realism movement. Realists rejected the distorted and idolized forms of the grand manner, as they valued truth in reality, and they claimed to be the true mirror of reality. Realism was a matter of truth to oneself, as well as to the social realities of one's time. In other words, for the realist, honesty had ramifications beyond art. It was an authentic vision of society that focused on the lives of the common and the everyday. Because the realists believed that the simple perception of the truth was shared by all people, the movement was associated with democracy, individual rights, and anti-authoritarianism. Next slide, please. The French realists, particularly those of the Barbizon school, worked outdoors and focused on rural life and labor. Two French realism paintings in the exhibition are to the left. The Hague School painters were inspired by 17th century Dutch art and the Barbizon school. They tended to center on somber depictions of Dutch landscapes and fishing and farming communities. Examples of these paintings in the exhibition are on the right. These images of common working people and scenes of nature appeal to Van Gogh's religious and moral sensibilities. Next slide, please. For example, in 1882, Van Gogh wrote his brother Theo about the inspiration invoked by the artist of French Realism in the Hague School. Quote, "There was a body of painters, writers, artists, in short, who were united despite their divisions, formed one force. One thing reinforced the other. It was powerful and noble." Today, Cindy and I will be exploring the works of these two schools displayed in the DIA's exhibition and their influence on Van Gogh. I'll begin with French Realism. Ready, Cindy?
Ready, Ray.
Here we go. Next slide, please. This pastel by Jean-François Millet is on display in the exhibition in one of several works by Millet in the DIA's collection. Millet's work deeply impacted Van Gogh even before he began his artistic career in 1880. Indeed, in June 1875, Van Gogh attended a Paris exhibition of Millet's works and wrote to his brother Theo, quote, "When I entered the room in Hotel Doro, where they were exhibited, I felt something to akin to, 'Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground.'" End of quote. French realists such as Millet and Daubigny, who we will be discussing later, were Van Gogh's heroes and were major inspirations in his decisions to become an artist. Next slide, please. Born in a prosperous peasant family from Normandy, Millet began his artistic career as a portrait painter, but he was unsuccessful. After the French Revolution of 1848, which led to the collapse of the monarchy and the rise of the Second French Republic, Millet realized his artistic calling was to join the anti-authoritarian French Realism movement. He moved his family to Barbizon, which is a village on the outskirts of the forest of Fontainebleau. There he became part of a group of artists that participated in an early 19th century movement that focused on 17th century Dutch and Flemish landscape paintings and a naturalistic style. Years after their founding, art scholars named them the Barbizon School. These artists were French realists who showed the rapidly disappearing rural life as a path to painterly truth. Unlike most of the artists of the Barbizon School, however, Millet's interest was not simply in landscapes, but in figures with a landscape background. Next slide, please. For Millet, truth was found in art concerning peasant life by depicting peasants as they lived and not poised or glamorized. The DIA has several of Millet's etchings, lithographs, and prints in its collection depicting peasant scenes. Note particularly the lithograph of the potato gatherers to the left and the etching of the gleaners on the bottom. Next slide, please. Here are two of Millet's more famous works. Each became extremely influential to many artists, but particularly Vincent van Gogh. The Gleaners is to the left. We just saw the DIA's etching of the Gleaners, and to the right is the Sower. These paintings and other Millet works showing peasants working on the land deeply touched Van Gogh. He found religious messages in them beyond their realist themes. The Sower is believed to be based upon a story from the Christian Bible when Jesus begins teaching in parables and tells the story of a man who sows seeds. Van Gogh preferred parables to convey biblical meaning and wisdom. Millet's image of a sower actually moved Van Gogh more than any other painting or etching he encountered. Next slide, please. In fact, early in his career, Van Gogh created many drawings of both the sower and the gleaners. During the last years of his life, when he had developed his mature style of vibrant colors and the thick application of paint, Van Gogh painted many renditions of the sower. Here are two examples. Next slide, please. Here is an example of Van Gogh painting a painting based upon Millet's The Gleaners. The DIA's etching is on the right. Next slide, please. Van Gogh also created paintings based upon Millet's The Diggers, which is on the left. On the right is a rendition by Van Gogh that will be on display. This is exciting, which will actually be on display in the Van Gogh in America exhibition beginning in October. Next slide, please. And of course, the DIA's The Diggers is another rendition by Van Gogh of Millet's etching. For Van Gogh, Millet's works transcended the political message of French realism, finding instead a religious, spiritual message. Prior to deciding to become an artist, Van Gogh spent 3 years in the clergy, but he was forced out, due in part to his religious extremism. Some scholars observe that art provided Van Gogh with a method of communicating his spiritual beliefs denied to him when he was forced out of the clergy. Van Gogh did not believe in painting of biblical scenes. As I mentioned, he was drawn to biblical parables, which couched Christian thought into ordinary life. In other words, Van Gogh valued images of modern everyday life that conveyed the emotion and meaning of religious morals. Van Gogh found messages of religious devotion in Millet's scenes of earthly pious peasants. As he wrote to his brother Theo, Van Gogh was drawn to the, quote, sublime, almost religious emotions, end of quote, of Millet's works, as Millet, quote, painted the doctrine of Christ, end of quote, without painting overtly biblical scenes. Next slide, please. Back to Millet's work that's in the exhibition. Millet was an exceptional draftsman, but his pastels, like this one in the exhibition, Mother Feeding Her Children, was highly innovative. Millet developed an original technique in which he literally drew in pure color. Beginning with a light chalk sketch, he applied the darks, then rubbed in the pastels to create the substructure, and finally built up the surface with a mosaic-like strokes of color. Moreover, Millet lightened his technique and experimented with different colored papers. He allowed the colored paper to show through in the finished composition. Millet's pastels, in their marriage of line and color, pointed forward toward Impressionism. In this 23.5 by 21.5 inch pastel, Millet shows a heartwarming scene of a peasant mother feeding her hungry children from a single bowl on a doorstep. One wonders if this is a scene of poverty or simply the mother sharing a treat among her children. But there is this moral overtone of motherly love and family warmth. We do not know if Van Gogh ever saw this pastel or Millet's drawings depicting a similar scene. But this image certainly would have fit in with Van Gogh's religious inspiration for Millet's work, as the Bible is filled with stories concerning mothers in noble acts of providing for their children. Christine, are there any questions?
Ray, we just have a few comments about how excited everyone is for the exhibition and that the museum is one of the viewers' favorite places in Detroit. So, and we have a large audience today too. So thank you everyone for joining us.
That's terrific. Cindy, did you ever work in pastel?
I did. Yes, I did.
His technique is considered revolutionary at the time. Jim, can we go to the next slide, please? Jim O'Malley is running our slides today. He's one of our producers.
Yay, Jim.
Yeah, well, let's not give him too much credit. Léon Augustin Lhermitte came to prominence in the late 1870s for his depictions of harvest scenes and rural life. His works were regularly selected for display at the prestigious Paris Salon, at which he won several medals. Here are three of the works that are displayed in DIA's collection. Exhibition, and they are in the DIA's collection. Van Gogh discovered Lhermitte's work when he lived in The Hague in the early 1880s. He greatly admired Lhermitte's scenes of peasants working, depicted as uncontrived, unposed, natural, and true. In an 1883 letter to his brother Theo, Van Gogh wrote, "Lhermitte's secret, it seems to me, is none other than that he knows the figure in general, namely the sturdy, severe workman's figure through and through, and takes his subjects from the heart of the people." End quote. In an early letter to Theo, earlier than this, the 1883 letter, Van Gogh mentions Lhermitte as Millet's successor. Quote, "I idolize his work as I do of Millet himself. I think his genius on a par with that of Millet." End of quote. In fact, Cindy, Van Gogh would refer in his letters to Lhermitte as Millet too. Van Gogh's first major painting, The Potato Eaters, actually borrowed compositional elements from Lhermitte's works. Next slide, please. Lhermitte was a French draftsman, printmaker, painter, and illustrator. He was the only son of a village schoolmaster and lived a peasant's life. But Lhermitte's talented drawing skills won him an annual grant from the state and apprenticeships at famous academies and with prestigious painters. In fact, in 1879, Degas invited Lhermitte to participate with the Impressionists at exhibitions, but Lhermitte declined. Next slide, please. In this stunning 3.5 foot tall and 4 foot wide painting, The Harvest, Lhermitte portrays rural work as victorious, as virtuous, and as heroic. Lhermitte conveys a dignified and idolized image of peasant life that Van Gogh so admired. Notice that the artist places two women workers in the foreground, close to the picture pane. This compositional aspect was incorporated by Van Gogh throughout his career. The young women look strong and their faces are stoic. None of the figures look posed. Their movements are natural. They are depicted as individuals actually engaged in work. Lhermitte surrounds the figures with green vegetation. And you can see that all over. There's green vegetation surrounding the figures. This enhances the sense that they are connected with and part of nature and engaged in a noble effort of gathering the gifts of the earth. Lhermitte contributes to this majestic theme by dimming the natural light. Next slide, please. You can see some similarities in the composition of Van Gogh's The Diggers. On the left, as we were mentioning, Lhermitte surrounds the workers with green vegetation, showing their connection with nature. And Jim, could you use your cursor for the digger figures in Van Gogh's painting? Van Gogh connects the digger figures to nature by their activity and their bendy, curvy features. Notice their arms and legs are bent in an unnatural manner, mirroring the curvy features of the trees and their branches. It strongly gives the feeling that the workers are as much a part of nature or God's creation as the trees and the plants. Next slide, please. This same compositional technique can be seen in these two wonderful Lhermitte pastels that are also part of the exhibition. On the left is a 31 by 39 inch The Return of the Geese. In this dreamlike scene, a procession of geese make their way back to the farm, seemingly welcomed by the young girl. There is a woman in the background. Jim, could you point that out with your cursor? Yes, the woman in the background with a child. But she's so much in the background and so blends into the background that she really looks like she's part of the countryside. It's a delightful picture of the connection of rural life to the natural world. On the right is the large, over 4 feet tall and 5 feet wide pastel called Washerwoman. This is a wonderfully executed image of the dignified figures of women nobly at work in a lovely countryside scene. While it's not symmetrical, there is a pleasing balance to the composition. The light and shade suggest it is late afternoon and the sun is beginning to set. In all of these works by Lhermitte, you can observe his preference for a nostalgic view of country life as a reaction to the extreme industrialization of society and the move toward urban life. Can we go to the next slide, please? We're continuing on with our French realist. And Van Gogh was greatly influenced by this particular French realist, Charles-François Daubigny. Like Millet and Lhermitte, Daubigny became one of Van Gogh's idols early in his artistic career and remained so throughout his life. This nearly 4 foot tall and nearly 6 foot wide Daubigny painting called Mills at Dordrecht is on display in the exhibition. Next slide, please. Daubigny was a member of the Barbizon school of French realism and was a strong influence on Van Gogh and several Impressionist artists. He's fascinating in this way. He was born to a family where his father and uncle were accomplished artists, and they taught him at a very young age. Early in his career, he painted in the Grand Master style, but later came to appreciate 17th century Dutch landscape painters and devoted himself to landscape painting. Next slide, please. The Barbizon school's credo or slogan was "Back to Nature." But this was not just a slogan for Daubigny, it was his striving. He realized that nature's beauty was everywhere, even in the simplest sights. He wrote in one of his letters, I love this, Cindy, quote, "I don't care for those too well-arranged compositions. What I like is the true countryside where an honest heap of manure has not been bashfully removed," end of quote. I don't know about you, but I think I could have had a painting without manure in my dining room, Cindy, and, maybe I'm a little bit too judgmental. In any event, Daubigny was one of the first landscape painters to take an interest in the changing and fleeting aspects of nature, which led to his two innovative approaches. And these were very innovative approaches to landscape painting that influenced a generation of artists, particularly Vincent van Gogh. The first innovation was to paint outdoors. He pioneered taking canvas and paint outdoors so one could experience nature. Daubigny was so dedicated to drawing and painting outdoors that he had a barge converted into a kind of floating studio so he could paint landscapes from a unique perspective. Daubigny's second novel approach was to capture the fleeting and changing movements of nature through light and rapid brushstrokes and color choices that enhance the contours of light. Although some critics labeled Daubigny's sketchy and fluid brushstrokes as a lazy style, it inspired many artists, including the Impressionists and Vincent van Gogh. In fact, Daubigny is recognized as an important figure in Impressionist and Post-Impressionist artist development of a naturalistic type style. For landscape painting, he bridged the gap between romantic and the more objective work of the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. This includes examples of Monet, who painted with Daubigny and followed his approach of painting outdoors with loose, fluid brushstrokes. Daubigny also painted with and influenced Paul Cézanne. Next slide, please. Daubigny's legacy includes inspiring many artists to paint moving and powerful landscapes. Van Gogh was one such artist. Van Gogh's interest in and forceful approach to landscape painting can be substantially credited to Daubigny. Here is an example of a Van Gogh landscape. Notice the richly moving and dynamic brushstrokes. Cindy will be treated to this painting in the DIA's Van Gogh in America exhibition in October. I cannot wait to stand in front of this painting. Next slide, please. The DIA painting in the Van Gogh's Artistic Route exhibition displays all of Daubigny's influential innovations. Daubigny began painting this large canvas outdoors during a trip to the Dutch countryside. The painting has Daubigny's mature and influential style of broad and vigorous brush strokes with color that is velvety, rich, and deep. Daubigny creates a feeling of peace and restful repose by combining an unpretentious simplicity to the composition with the warm colors of the setting sun that shines on the red roofs and the masts of the sleeping boats. Christine, I should check in with you. Are there any questions?
Not at this time, Ray, but this, I do want to encourage everybody to come down because there was a question about the exhibition itself and Van Gogh's artistic roots and the influences of French Realism and the Hague School. This little exhibition is behind Rivera Court and there is no charge, it's free. When you're in the museum, you don't have to get a separate ticket to see it. And the paintings, the slides are lovely, but they're just not the same as seeing it in person. Yeah. So
I absolutely agree, Christine. Like this particular painting and the next painting that we'll be dealing with are breathtaking in
absolutely beautiful in person. And this show, we're very lucky. It's going to run until January 29th of 2023. So everyone who's watching, come down and see it. It's just the galleries are, they're a good size. They're very accessible. There's lots of paintings up, and they're just beautiful. All these pieces that Cindy and Ray are talking about are hung right now.
And there's labels too, to remind people who are in the gallery of what the inspiration was for Van Gogh. And on the labels, you'll see some of Van Gogh's works that were inspired by these particular artists. It's a taste of a much deeper much deeper thought process with respect to Van Gogh. But Christine, I've been there and I've toured some people with it, and people come away with, oh, now I understand a little bit. I understand why he's doing this. So I think it really does enhance people's appreciation of his art. I know this exhibition has done so for me.
Absolutely. It's a terrific precursor to Van Gogh in America. So, yeah, come on down. It's a great show.
And again, there's labels, and there docents from time to time will be in there too. So you can chat with them about the art. Can we go to the next slide, Jen? This is a fantastic painting. It's over 2 feet high and almost 3 feet wide. It's oil on canvas. It's called Going to Pasture and is by the Dutch artist Anton Mauve. Mauve belonged to and was considered to be one of the best of the Hague School Dutch artists. Cindy will be discussing the Hague School in depth in just a moment. Millet and other Barbizon artists, such as Daubigny, greatly influenced Mauve's artistic style, both in subject matter and in composition. Indeed, due to that influence, Mauve's painting style can be seen as a bridge between French realism and the Hague School. Next slide, please. Mauve came from a large family of clergymen in the province of North Holland. At the age of 16, he was an apprentice to various artists who specialized in animal painting. Mauve, however, always added human figures with animals in the composition of his paintings, suggesting a connection between humans and animals. This preference created an important difference in Mauve's work from that of Millet, and Millet tended to depict the struggle of man against nature. But Mauve emphasized the bond between humans and nature, including the relationship between humans and animals. Mauve is best known for paintings that depict peasants working in the fields. Next slide, please. As I indicated in the introduction there in the beginning, in December 1881, shortly after Van Gogh began pursuing a career as an artist, he traveled to The Hague to study with Mauve. Mauve was the husband of Van Gogh's cousin. Mauve's love of French realism painting and his position as a foremost artist in the Hague School significantly influenced Van Gogh. Van Gogh worked at Mauve's studio for a short period of time, during which Mauve taught Van Gogh basic aspects of painting and encouraged him to paint outdoors and of real-life scenes. Van Gogh was the only workshop assistant Mauve ever had. After only 3 months, however, there was a complete break between the two painters. Nonetheless, Van Gogh's work clearly showed that he learned a good deal during his brief period as a student of Mauve, including such themes as diggers, potato harvesters, and the wood merchants, all of which were the subject matter of Van Gogh's works in several of his paintings. Next slide, please. This exhibition painting of Mauve's Going to Pasture demonstrates his tendency to show a bond between humans and animals. The humans do not appear to be authoritatively herding the sheep toward the pasture, but due to Mauve's composition, color choices, and brushwork, the humans appear to be part of the herd. Moreover, those same elements create the sense that the human and animal figures are not intruders to the countryside, but as much a part of nature as the trees, vegetation, and other aspects of the land. Mauve's landscapes showing cows, horses, and sheep were especially popular, particularly among American collectors. One of most distinct qualities is the diffused silvery light he creates, which makes a dreamlike atmosphere. It's thought to be inspired by the light that surrounded the Hague in the dunes and marshes. The sheep, with their fleece catching the light, seem to dissolve almost completely into a simple white mass, with the human figures completing the grouping. Cindy, you ready to take it away with the Hague School?
I am. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Thank you for introducing Anton Mauve and for the great foundation that you laid for me to now talk about the Hague School. So the Hague School was named as such to describe a group of Dutch artists mainly living in The Hague, which was once the capital of the Netherlands. So you can see we've got that little pin drop there so we know where we're talking about. Two generations of painters who were born approximately between 1820 and 1845. So we're talking about a time span of about 25 years. They made up the group, and they drew their inspiration from the flat polder reclaimed land and the everyday lives of peasants and fishermen. I had to look up that word polder. I'd never seen that before, but it refers to the fact that, in the Netherlands, a lot of the land that they build on has been reclaimed from the sea by dikes and dams. In 1848, the revolution in Europe and France led the public to lean towards simpler representations of peasant life, as you noted earlier, as it was this rural culture that sustained while the economy was struggling after the war. Pastoral landscapes and intimate views of interiors helped keep the nation's spirits uplifted. And most of what we looked at the turn here before I took over, those were beautiful pastoral landscapes. They were uplifting. They were of sentimental kinds of scenes. As Ray said, Mauve was a prominent inspiration for Van Gogh's work. At the age of 27, in the summer of 1880, Van Gogh decided to devote himself to painting. 1 year later, he arrived in The Hague, where he had earlier worked as an art dealer. Following Mauve's influence and encouragement to paint from real life, he began in plein air painting country scenes and peasants in rural surroundings, as Ray showed you earlier. By the 1860s, Jozef Israëls, who we'll be talking about in a moment, established himself as the leading artist of the Hague School. This group of painters built on the foundation laid by the 17th century masters like Rembrandt of the Dutch Golden Age. But in style, they definitely leaned toward their contemporaries of the Barbizon School of France, as Ray noted. The group distinguished itself from the French by adopting a preference for tonal painting. What do I mean by that? It's a monochromatic color spectrum, and their rendering of atmospheric effects in this monochrome kind of tone earned them the nickname the Gray School. They dominated the Dutch art world until the end of the 19th century. They most often painted on a small scale to satisfy their Dutch patrons who lived in cozy, intimate homes on patches of land reclaimed from the sea. So when you're in the exhibition, you'll notice that the larger paintings are from the French Barbizon School. The smaller paintings and etchings are from the Hague School. Vincent van Gogh, along with later artists like Piet Mondrian, who we'll be talking more about later, were heavily influenced by the Hague School in the earlier part of their careers as artists. Their work was widely exhibited, collected abroad in North America, Canada, and Scotland. They were successful artists, and some of their very committed North American patrons were the Forbes family, who were originally from Scotland. If we could go to the next slide, please. The early paintings of Van Gogh owed much to the subject matter and artistic techniques of Jozef Israëls, who we see here. He saw Israël's vision of the everyday routines of life. And in Jozef Israëls, the young mother, we see the blur of lines between spatial and ordinary. What do I mean by that? So in the background, you can see that we've got these really somber colors, and everything sort of just is diffused, there are no lines. Everything's diffused one into another. It actually is a small painting, small in size for the Dutch art market. It's only 16 by 24. And then in the foreground, if you look, you can see there's a kettle and a bowl. And there we can make out the distinct edges. And we can also note, hopefully you can see it in this slide, in the very bottom, kind of little left of middle, there's a cat who is eating from a dish on the floor. So we've got a very cozy, intimate scene. If we could move to the next, please. Thank you. So Israëls was born to a Dutch Jewish family. and he became the most internationally known and celebrated Dutch painter of the 19th century. He was considered the leader of the Hague School. He was responsible for introducing French realism into the Dutch art realm. His themes rose from things like romantic poetry, Dutch national history, and what some called sentimental genre paintings and portraits, like what we've just looked at and what we'll be continuing to look at. His subjects included fishermen's wives waiting for their return, their children, them working, and even their deaths. Later, he focused on motherhood and domestic harmony. So if we could go to the next, please. Now, this is a cartoon that was done by John Brakenseek. He was an illustrator and also did cartoons, very well known. If you look him up, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of political cartoons that he did. And he's kind of satirizing the popularity of Joseph Israëls. The figure on the left is actually a caricature of Rembrandt, and he is holding, I guess, something over the head of Israëls, kind of
Like
bestowing.
Looks like a crown, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, bestowing upon him, some kind of an award or reward for his work. If we can move ahead one more, please. Thank you. So toward the end of his life, he was increasingly drawn to the Jewish environment and biblical subject matter, not unlike his Dutch Golden Age predecessors. This shift illustrates his strong identification with Rembrandt. And you certainly can tell by the very dark backgrounds and this kind of spectral source of light that is right on the figure that he wants you to focus your attention on. Looks very much like the light effects that Rembrandt also used many years earlier. He worked solely from sketchbooks to later create paintings in his studio. He rejected en plein air painting, unlike many of his contemporaries. He was even known to reconstruct fishermen's interiors in his studio, into which he would insert and pose his models. His studio was located in the garden of his home in The Hague. Unlike Van Gogh, he was well known and successful in his lifetime, not only in the Netherlands, but also England, Germany, Italy, and North America. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the Cottage Madonna. It's from the DIA's permanent collection, and it certainly does suggest the influence of Millet, who was an important source of inspiration, as Ray said earlier. I want you to take a look. If you can see in the background, there's a cross up on the mantle, hanging from the mantle. In the front, she has her foot kind of sitting on a foot warmer. She's in sort of a Madonna-like pose, and she's dressed in the blue and white surplice of Mary, the colors of the surplice of Mary. And in the background, we can see the blue and white tiles on the wall that are certainly, pointing toward a Dutch interior. Everything that we see here, all of these are simpler themes of peasant life where beauty was in the ordinary. Now, if we go to the next.
Before you do,
yes,
the barefoot, the fact that she's got barefoot feet really does add to the composition and sense of peasant life.
Yes, absolutely. A portrait of someone from an upper class would never show a person with their bare feet. No, thanks for pointing that out, Ray.
Oh, sure.
So if we go to the next, we're going to take a look at a sketch that was created not before the painting Cottage Madonna. It was created long after, decades afterward. And it's titled Mother Feeding Her Baby. And Joseph Israëls actually created this sketch for the same person who owned the original painting. And if we go ahead one, please, Jim, we can see the side-by-side of the sketch. And so you can see he was kind of trained in the classical manner. He sketched, he sketched, he did underpainting, he did, he wasn't like Van Gogh in that he went en plein air and just started, working right on the canvas. No, there was a lot of pre-work before he actually started to lay paint on the canvas. If we could go to the next, please. Now we're going to move on to Piet Mondrian, and this is his name was later shortened to Piet. we see still life with sunflowers. Now, this is a large painting, unlike the others that we've been talking about. And he usually did work in a larger scale, usually about 4x4. So Piet grew up in an artistic and spiritual household. His father, also named Peter, was a member of the aristocratic circle in The Hague, and his father was a political activist. His brothers Willem and Louis were also painters, and they moved about in Amsterdam's artistic circles. He started his training in drawing at an early age, and he later became qualified to give drawing lessons. His mature style was a combination of his study of the Hague School, the Dutch Impressionists, and Symbolism, which we're going to get to, and it's going to be shocking. In 1905, a large exhibition of Van Gogh's work in Amsterdam propelled a lasting influence on Mondrian's work. For Mondrian, who started painting about 1890, Van Gogh was certainly a principal artistic fact of life. He had a similar determination to Van Gogh to assert his individuality at all costs, and it characterized his work for the next 25 years. So if we can move to the next. So how do we get from a painting like Still Life with Sunflower, which is this beautiful, tablescape? We've got kind of more the greenish somber colors in the background. We've got some items on the table and this beautiful sunflower right in the middle of the composition. How do we get from that to Broadway Boogie Woogie? Well, we're going to try to show you what the transition was. If you notice the dates on these, Still Life with Sunflower is 1907 and Broadway Boogie Woogie was 1942. So this is less, like around 35 years later in his career. But wow, how things changed. If we could go to the next, please. On the left, we have composition number 10. This is not in the exhibition. I'm only showing it to you as an aside so we can kind of talk about the transition that occurred for Mondrian. In the early years of the 20th century, he started to embrace a geometrical Dutch version of the Art Nouveau, in which liquid shapes started to melt into one another. The shapes reached the top of the canvas. As you can see, it's actually cropped. The top of that oval is cropped off. And the canvas is backlit to create sort of an atmospheric effect around the corners and the edges. Color plays a very minor role here. Toward the final years of his career, he encountered Cubism and continued to experiment with Cubist-derived forms, which leads us to lozenge composition with yellow, black, blue, red, and gray. Here he created linear structures which stand out against a neutral background. So in lozenge, and from 1916 onward, he painted large, we'll call them rectilinear color squares. He filled them with red, blue, and yellow primary colors. And as you can see, the color squares were entirely contained by these black grids on a diamond-shaped canvas, which he used to combat the mechanical lifelessness of the design. I think that's kind of an odd description of this painting. But he was very concerned about trying to give these compositions life. As an example, he would frame them with wood that would have the canvas stand out from the wall. And then when he would hang them on an angle so that they angled away from the wall. And those were very, very well thought out techniques to try and give these really flat kind of two-dimensional designs a little more dynamism. And then if we'll go to the next, please. So here we are, Still Life with Sunflower, and then we're at Broadway Boogie Woogie. So at the end of his life, he painted two paintings, Broadway Boogie Woogie and Victory Boogie Woogie. This is one of those two. They were both 4x4. In this, one of the last two, he veers away from the formulaic De Stijl. De Stijl was a periodical that had been produced in the Netherlands, and De Stijl means the style. And it dealt with trying to simplify the environment into grids, squares, no narrative in these paintings. Simplify it to the most simple forms that you can think of. No narrative here. This series that he painted, Broadway Boogie Woogie and Victory Boogie Woogie, explored areas of color without any black lines. Do we have any questions, Christine? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask earlier. I was on a roll.
No, you're on a great roll, Cindy, and I didn't barge in because there are no questions right now.
Okay. All right. Great. So if we can move to the next, Jim, please. Thank you. So now we're going to take a look at some etchings and a couple of watercolors. And while these may not be the most, might not have the most wow factor of some of the other things that we've been looking at, they are very important. They were done by the Dutch printmaker and painter. Now, let me say this name. It's a mouthful. Carel Nicholas Storm Vaness Gravesand. And I wondered if I could just continue to refer to him as Gravesand. But no, I have to refer to him as Storm Vaness Gravesand. So that's what you're going to hear. He lived throughout Europe, in Germany, France, and Belgium, as well as his birthplace in the Netherlands. And here we see the Port of Bergen, OP Zoom Low Tide. That is how you pronounce it. I looked it up. I would have said op, but it's OP Zoom. So he really started to explore dry point etching, making multiples, and his scenes were usually waterscapes, seascapes, and urban landscapes, more so than rural scenes. He developed a considerable reputation for his work in etching, as we can see. And I want you to know that these etchings are quite small, most of them. I'll get to the sizes in just a minute. His graphic work was popular. It was widely distributed abroad as well as across Europe. So think about this. He produced over 550 etchings, 100 lithographs, and they were printed in multiples. So imagine the output of this one artist. He's known as one of the creators of the first lithographs that were printed from aluminum plates. It was a kind of a new invention rather than using a stone for a lithograph or using a zinc plate. In 1900, he was awarded the gold medal at the Paris Exposition, and it doesn't get much better than that. The DIA's collection of Storm Vaness Gravesand's graphic work comes from a bequest by the Detroiter Charles Lang Freer. And Freer made his considerable fortune manufacturing rail cars, and the name of his company was the Peninsular Rail Car Company. So most of these in this group you'll see came from Freer. So if we'll move to the next, please. Here we have Carel Nicholas Storm Vaness Gravesand, looking every bit the very sophisticated artist. And I want you to know that he has an ancestor with the same name who is a businessman today. That popped up and I was like, they must be related. Two people couldn't have that name. It wouldn't be possible. If we can go to the next, please. This is a watercolor, and it's called the Maas near Rotterdam. The Maas was also known as the Meuse, M-E-U-S-E, and it was actually a river in the Netherlands that flowed into Europe. So most people who lived in that area would have certainly known, what this scene was showing. What's interesting about this, we were talking about the tonality and the monochromatic kinds of color selections by the Hague School. Here we've got this watercolor in its fragility. It's just a suggestion of a horizon, hardly a suggestion of buildings. And yet we can look at this and we know that it's a seascape. There's really not a lot of detail other than these vertical lines that move through it that we can pick out as masts. So this is quite small. It's only 8 by 14. And as I said, it was a watercolor. If we can go to the next, please.
It's small, Cindy, but in the gallery, it really has a powerful presence in the gallery. It is a beautiful watercolor.
It is. It's just got such a fragility to it. It is beautiful. Again, we have the Maas near Rotterdam, the Maas off Dordrecht. And this is also a watercolor, but a really different kind of a style. And these were actually painted around the same time. Here we have a lot of detail. He's really picking out every bit of rigging on that boat. It's really nothing like the one that we were just looking at. So, he was experimenting with different styles of seascape painting. And then next, Thank you, Jim. This is Dordrecht Moonrise, and you can see the little tiny moon over there in the corner. This is really quite large. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this isn't. This is really quite small. It's only 6 by 8 inches. And this was done in dry point. What do I mean when I say dry point? When you're doing an etching, sometimes the plate, which could be zinc, it could be copper, is usually charged, or you use a brayer to add a ground. And then you use a stylus to draw into that ground. With dry point, no ground. You are drawing right into the plate. So it's a lot more difficult and not really very forgiving for errors. And with that, it looks like we're getting close to our time. Jim, if you'll go to the last slide, please. Thank you.
Oh.
So from both Ray and I, thank you for joining us today. As you know, the DIA is wide open, and we invite you to plan your visit by reserving a ticket via the website. The DI is open Tuesday through Thursday, 9 to 4, Friday, 9 to 9, and Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 5. Our current exhibitions include the one we've just been talking about, Van Gogh's Artistic Roots, the Hague School, and French Realism through January 29th. And you know, I really would encourage you to go and see this because it's genius. It was genius on the part of our interpretive planners to build this foundation for Van Gogh's work. I mean, we all know his work is beautiful. Most people love Impressionism. It's so colorful. But I found it really interesting, and I know Ray did too, to see, in the beginning of his career, how was he influenced? Where did the things that he was creating at the end of his career fit in? And his career was quite short. I think it was only about 10 years. So a lot of changes in a short period of time. We also have another exhibition, Conscious Response, Photographers Changing the Way We See. And as we said, Van Gogh in America will be opening October 2nd. Thank you to Sharon Harrell, our Community Engagement Manager from Wayne County, Chris Mark, our Interpretive Programs Manager, and of course, Jim O'Malley, who was helping to produce the show today.
And this is Jim right after we're done today. That's what this
and Jim is volunteer extraordinaire. Next Thursday, August 25th, please join us for a Detroit Film Theater movie, The Last Laugh, which is what we're showing here. And then on September 8th, we'll have Thursday at the museum presentation titled Child's Play. And these are works of art from the DIA's collection that show children. So it should be light and lovely. And then on September 15th, Ray and I will be back to talk to you about Van Gogh in America. And I cannot tell you how excited we are to be able to start working on this talk for you. We've already had a few little conversations about it, but we're really, really excited to come back and see you on September 15th. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And again, please join us on August 25th for The Last Laugh. Thanks, everyone.